can't think as people do. The machine is different.
Being, what marvelous being! How gratifying! How gratifying!
I'm Rianna Sharp. I'm CEO and founder of the Institute for Women's Leadership and Gender Partnership, and I've been at work on that my entire life. And I'm particularly in love with this film, this documentary, because I think it is a call to action for us as a country. So that's what has me be here tonight, to have that conversation with you.
Okay, I'm Roz Ho, and I'm a vice president at Ericsson working on TV software. Been in the industry for over 30 years, and I know I just dated myself, so please don't tell. I was at Microsoft for 22 years prior to Ericsson, and I worked on a lot of amazing software products, some of which you probably use today, PowerPoint being the one that I worked on the longest. I'm here today because I'm really, actually very fond of this industry, and I think we just need a lot more people, including women and people of different diverse backgrounds, to participate in building the next generation of technology that's really going to be a keystone of our civilization moving forward.
Hi, I'm Danielle Feinberg. I work at Pixar, and I direct the lighting for our films, but I also have a computer science degree. And when I was in college 20 years ago, there were 5 to 10% women in my classes. And so part of why I'm involved in the film and do a lot of outreach to girls is to try and get more girls and more diversity in tech, because having sort of lived through being the other in the room and the loneliness that brings and the struggle, just really to pursue something that you love and the amount of energy that goes into sort of fighting off all the stupid stuff, try to help so girls today don't have to go through that as much.
My name is Albury Brown. I got into tech about 3 years ago, became a software engineer. And when I got into tech, there was nobody who looked like me at the companies that I worked at. Anybody that I really interacted with, whether it be at the grocery store, who considered themselves engineers. So I ended up starting a school, a boot camp that's geared specifically toward people of color. So this diversity conversation is very important to me. And of course, I'm advocating for people of color, but I am also advocating for women, because we need as many people, as many different backgrounds as possible to get into this field.
So what I'm wondering from you all is, based on where you work and what you do, what do you think the biggest impediment is to changing this?
Well, what I've seen, because I've been at it for a very long time, is that it's fundamentally an issue of unconscious bias. It's the blind spots that we have as human beings, in which we look around, we see a condition, and we think somebody ought to do something about it, or that it doesn't have to do with me. And that's what I've seen in all the years that I've worked in corporations with teams of men and women, and trying to get after this and really poke into it, is that there's just a tremendous amount of unconsciousness that we have women with women and men with women that leaves us in this situation. So that for me is like the fundamental. If we can crack the code on that, we can go a long way towards, getting after the rest of it.
Yeah, so and just piggybacking off of that, I definitely think unconscious bias is one of the main challenges to debugging the gender gap. I also think it's like a confluence of other things that come out of unconscious bias, in the sense that, and we were talking about this earlier, like if you see a movie, right? You see a movie, there's a movie that just came out, was it Hacker or something like that, about a year ago? That was a white dude, right? And every movie that you've seen where the dude who does either science or some sort of math or especially software engineering is a white dude. So if you have years and years and years of only seeing white dudes code, what do you think your daughters are going to get into? Not code, because they don't see themselves doing it. And I think this is why this movie is so important, because it literally shows anybody who is watching it who they can recognize themselves in the characters, that they can do it. And I think that's one of the biggest impediments towards getting into it.
I actually think that, of course there is that. I've certainly experienced it myself, but I think one of the things is I don't think we do a really good job of talking about how coding can really affect the world today. Like, I think that for a lot of women that I talk to, they like to do something that's impactful and has meaning. I think that's a lot of it. And I think we need to do a much better job of explaining that, code is a part of how this world gets built and has been for a while and will be in the future. And it is totally relevant to everything that you want to improve and do better, whether it's the coffee maker at home or, changing something more fundamental about the human condition. So I think we need to do a much better job, and I think, with unconscious bias, you also don't have enough role models. There's not enough women in tech today. People don't look up, women don't look up, and people, different ethnicity don't look up and say, hey, that guy looks like me. I can be that.
And, one of the amazing things is there are going to be, I think, roughly 1 million jobs, coding, programming jobs that could be vacant by 2020. So you've certainly got an incentive for people to go out there and learn how to code. It simply comes down to employment. And then you've got an economic incentive on the part of companies to basically, if they look like their customers, there's actually proven data and research that shows that you're probably going to do better at selling what you sell. Given those two things, why do we still have this huge disconnect of young people not realizing this could be a path to employment, and on the corporate side, folks saying, hey, how quickly can we make our company diverse because we're going to actually make more money?
I think there is a real problem with what people think programming is, and obviously you saw it in the movie, what you think a programmer is. It's the white guy in the hoodie or whatever it is now, but I used to think it was the guy with long hair in the basement, but I think there's a real issue with knowing, just understanding what programming is. We're talking backstage and about issues, and then Roz says, but I love this. And I'm like, I love this too. This is the greatest job ever. But kids don't know that. They know being a singer is amazing, and I'm going to beat down doors to be the next American Idol or something, right? Or I'm going to be the next famous athlete, and I don't care what stands in my way. And so you have people coming from all different places to do that. You don't get that with coding as much, but you probably make almost as much money at this point at some of these places, but there's so many jobs that you can have doing all kinds of different things, and so I think part of it really is a perception of what it is the problem.
And that constricts that proverbial pipeline, I assume, right?
Yeah, we've also got a problem with, in this country in particular, about the long game versus the short game. So once the stock market became the determining factor of everything that happens in commerce, everything is run by quarterly results. So you find these tension points within organizations where people are like, well, we got to make the quarter, we've got to hit the analysts' expectations, we've got to make the quarter. Meanwhile, we're watching, 43 million Americans are going to retire in the next 15 years, and the backfill for that, we don't even have it. A huge percentage of the backfill of that is women and people of color. So we are completely in the hurt locker. But, it's not right up on us, like it's not meeting the analysts' expectations next quarter, so we're not tending to it. That's what I see.
And that's what you're trying to address with.
Yeah, well, so I think it's a couple of things. One, there's definitely it's hard to become a software engineer who gets hired, right? You have to have a CS degree from a top institution to be hired at least with the current standards. So I have to go to an MIT or a Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. But we're expanding that. There are boot camps now that are all over the place that you can, in 3 months, just totally change your career. Of course, you have to do it 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, but That's my program. I have to give myself a little shout out. That pipeline is being opened. And to your question about the companies, we could say that we could say that companies don't care. I think that there are some companies that don't care. I think there are companies that do care as well. But I also think that there are companies that every single company really doesn't know how they're going to do it. They just have no idea. And they don't know who to talk to about it. They don't know who to ask, because this problem has just become a national conversation. And now they're all scrambling to figure out how it's going to happen. And I just don't think they know.
Yeah, I mean, what you're referring to is a lot of top companies, whether it's Dropbox, Pinterest, Google, they're all hiring diversity officers. Do any of you have any thoughts on how they're doing? Because obviously tech companies have had their toes held to the fire to release numbers that show that they're essentially mostly staffed by white men and Asians, and then everyone else is way down the list. So they've been hiring these diversity positions, but what's your take on how that's going, whether that's made an impact at companies like a Microsoft or Ericsson, for that matter?
Well, you know, the funny thing is that when all the companies release their stats at the same time, they all look at each other and say, well, I'm as good as that guy over there. So it's almost not having the effect, you know, the total effect that you think it should be. But, you know, I mean, both at Ericsson and at Microsoft, which is the two big companies I've worked for, you know, there's a lot of really good intentions. There's a lot of well-intentioned people trying to solve the problem. But I think, you know, like Albert was saying, we're not maybe looking broadly enough to hire, you know, okay, so you're not going to get enough CS candidates. Maybe what you do is you hire someone who doesn't, you know, seem to have the right qualification, but you invest in training that person. And, you know, that could be something that the companies can do, and they're talking about doing that. So there are a lot of people, you know, companies like to operate by metrics, right? So you'll see everybody with KPIs that says, you know, I got to have 30% women, you know, there are software engineers and so on and so forth. And that's a good thing. You might think that that is a false statistic, but actually it's a good thing because it moves everybody to action. And I think most of the big tech companies are doing that. So I am hopeful that things could change.
I was going to say, do you find that tech companies are interested in the people you're graduating, or are they balking because they're not coming from well-known institutions?
So I would say that most of our graduates go to smaller startups rather than big companies. We have not had contact with like an Intel who just put $300 million towards diversity. Right. We have not had contact with like HP or anything like that. So I would say that the bigger companies are not, are not there yet. But I think going back to the point of, I just don't think companies know how. Let's take an example from the movie, right? Etsy, 30% women. That is amazing. But how many people of color do you think they had? How many women of color did you see in that office, right? So even when you fix the problem, you don't fix the problem. And unless you really figure out how to fix it all around, how to fix it for everybody, then it's still going to be an issue. And I don't think that companies are ready to know how to invest in that without throwing money at the problem.
Well, and that brings up another issue we discussed, and which was tackled in the film too, which is retention. So let's say you get African Americans, women, other people of color in your company. That's great. Maybe 6 months later, they look around and go, well, nobody here's like me, and they leave. So there goes your diversity.
Part of this that I think is just bizarre in some way. If you look at a Fortune 50 company, and they've decided we have got to seize the China market. Our growth engine is going to be in China, India, Brazil, international. They would set up a whole war room. They would throw millions of dollars of investment into what is it going to take to win China in our category, in our therapeutic area, if it's in medicine or whatever. and they would leave no stone unturned. They would spend endless amount of time figuring out how to solve that commercial thing. There is money being put behind this, but it's not like that. Let me tell you, anybody on this stage that works in commerce and knows how Roz has been at it, forever. When you
Well, not quite forever.
But there's such a difference when you want to get after something, or wireless, or cloud computing, or whatever it is. There's just a different way we go about it, and this is a bunch of well-intended people with heartfelt sincerity, but we're not leaving every stone unturned so that we have to actually confront some of the more difficult issues.
Well, when does it get to every stone unturned?
Say that again?
What's going to get it to that point where companies feel like we need to get on this? I presume that happens when they don't have anybody to hire.
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen, is we're going to hit this cliff, that we're going to be driving off this cliff when we've got an exit of 43 million Americans leaving the workforce, and our backfill is like 13.
Well, they're also not Americans who know how to code, if you're talking about boomers.
Yeah, that's right.
So.
But the point is that they won't be in the workplace. And what we'll be doing is we'll be making clothing with technology. We'll be making seats with technology. Everything we make will be with technology, but we won't have the workforce to actually build what it is that we need to build.
I want to ask each one of you to, and then we'll throw it open to questions. Aubrey, did you want to respond to that? Well, I wanted to ask you to maybe provide a little piece of advice for anyone in the audience who knows somebody who wants to code, has thought about coding, tried and dropped out. This is the future. It's not even the future, it's the now, especially in the Bay Area. What sort of advice do you have for people who may be interested and intrigued in this and may be resisting for now?
I hear some of the girls I talk to say things like, well, I'm not good at math. I actually have to be good at math to program. Or, well, I don't know if I'm smart enough to do that. Like, there's this view you have to be some kind of like genius to ever even like step foot in front of a computer to program it or something. And so I think the important thing is finding a way to try it. And also a lot of the girls that I've found that don't like it, it's actually because they have a bad teacher or they've used some bad online program that is confusing because it's confusing, not because they aren't capable of doing it. So I think the important thing is to try, and if you don't like it, try it again, and so encouragement from adults on that, I think, plays a big role.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about backstage was just how creative this really is. That you're literally creating products and whole new ways of doing things. So I would say most people are pretty goal-oriented. So I think it starts with, what are you trying to solve? Like, what problem? Think of something that interests you, and think of how you might want to solve that. And that could lead you to tools like coding that could help you solve a particular problem. And so I think if you spin it, it's not like eating your spinach and you have to learn how to code. It's more like...
Right, you were saying earlier, it's like, I wish my phone did this, and code's the tool to do it, but it's not the learning the code for code's sake.
I mean, here's a really simple thing, like, learn how to write an app for your iPhone or your Android device or something. It's actually not that hard. And if you ever thought, like, there's a startup company I just learned about that wrote an app on Let's Go to Lunch. And the whole idea is you just, you're on this app and you send this out to everybody in your office building. And people show up for lunch and you're thinking, that's a really simple idea. They've got funding. They've got VC funding. It's the oddest thing ever. But it's a simple concept. So, you can get your phone to do something you want it to do, like whatever it is, a daily problem. And just, figure out how to do that.
I had a coworker whose daughter wasn't really interested in coding, and he's a programmer, so it was depressing to him. And so we strategized about it, and it turned out she really liked puppies, and so he pitched her, so they made a website together about sort of, having lost puppies be reunited, or I don't know exactly what it was, but it's like girls so gravitate towards the social good, and he tricked her into programming. It was awesome.
So piece of advice number 2, trick people into code.
Trick them into. The other thing is, girls naturally affiliate, so they have their little tribe of girlfriends, and if they'll do it together, it creates a social reinforcement and support for that confidence gap that sometimes happens. So that would be another thing I would say. Hey, make it something that you're going to do together and going to solve some kind of social thing or something that you're really interested in.
The main piece of advice, or the one thing, if you have listened to nothing that I've said, which is fine because I talk a lot, learn how to code. Just spend 6 weeks, or a month or two, just getting into some code. Whether you like it or not, just push through it. Because here are a couple things that I know. On average, in the Bay Area, software engineers make about $105,000. There are programs out there that you can do that in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 4 years, however long that you want to do it. There will always be a job for you. Who here likes to have a job? Raise your hand. Great. 2 people raise their hand. That's kind of scary. But the second thing is once you learn how to code, you can teach somebody else. And you can also give somebody else your opinion as to whether learning how to code was fun. And you can start the conversation with a daughter, a mother, a cousin, anybody, a friend, anybody who's around you. So I'd say if you really want to empower somebody, learn yourself.
Well, thanks everybody for staying late. Thanks to my panelists here, and have a great night.